On their way to the airport, desperate to escape the reach of the club, something terrifying happened. As they drove through the expressway, Rose suddenly lost her vision. It wasn't gradual. One moment she could see, and the next, everything was dark. Panic gripped her as she frantically tried to clear her eyes, but nothing worked. "Rose? What's happening?" Andrew's voice was filled with alarm as he glanced at her, but then his own heart stopped when he looked at the windshield. A strange, ethereal face appeared, barely visible, but enough to send a chill down his spine. It wasn't just an illusion, it felt real. His hands gripped the steering wheel, but it became impossibly stiff. The car no longer responded to his movements. The road ahead seemed to twist unnaturally, and his panic grew. The car began to veer off course. "Andrew, something's wrong," Rose shouted, her voice filled with fear. "It's them, the Widows Club. They're doing this to us." Andrew, now fully panicked, could hear the roar of a large truck speeding up behind them. His mind raced, knowing they were heading towards certain disaster if he couldn't regain control of the car. His heart pounded in his chest as he shouted, "Jesus! Jesus! Please help us!" As if by a miracle, just moments before the truck was about to crash into them, the car's steering wheel loosened. With a sudden jolt, it was as if the grip on the car had been released. Andrew was able to regain control just in time, swerving the car to the side of the road. The truck sped by, narrowly missing them. The car came to a screeching halt, and both of them sat there, trembling in the aftermath of the near accident. Rose's vision slowly began to return, and she gasped as she looked around, still shaken by the events. That was them," Rose whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "The Widows Club. They've been watching us. They're trying to stop us from leaving. They won't let me go." Andrew stared at her, still unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. His breath was heavy and his pulse raced. "What are we going to do, Rose? They almost killed us." Rose wiped her eyes, still shaken but determined. "We can't keep running. They'll find us wherever we go." "I don't know what to do anymore, Andrew." A silence hung between them, filled only by the distant sounds of the busy highway. The weight of their situation had never felt so heavy, and it seemed that no matter how far they ran, they couldn't escape the reach of the Widows Club. "We need to find another way," Rose finally said, her voice filled with desperation. "We can't keep living in fear." The torment continued, both physical and psychological. Every night, they were haunted by the Widows Club, the women appearing in their dreams, whispering menacing words, reminding Rose of the price she had to pay. Andrew, too, started having vivid nightmares of death, betrayal, and the club's relentless pursuit of power. He woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing, unable to escape the fear that gripped him. One morning, after another sleepless night, Rose and Andrew sat together, facing the harsh truth of their situation. "We have to end this," Rose said, her face pale and drawn. "If we keep running, they'll never stop coming for us. We have to deceive them. We need them to think you're dead." Andrew stared at her, disbelief in his eyes. "What? You want me to fake my death?" Rose nodded solemnly. "Yes, they'll leave us alone if they think you're gone. But you have to play the part, be buried in front of them so they believe it. After that, we can disappear for good." Andrew hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision. "But Rose, that's dangerous. What if something goes wrong? What if they don't believe it? Or worse, they find out?" "I don't see any other choice," Rose replied, her voice shaking with fear but also determination. "We've tried everything else. If we don't do this, they'll destroy us. They'll never stop." Andrew took a deep breath, staring at her with a mixture of love and uncertainty. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll do it. For you. For us." With their plan set in motion, Rose reached out to the Widows Club, telling them she had decided to follow through with their demand. She would kill Andrew, her husband, and come back into the fold. The response came quickly, the women eagerly awaiting her return. They told her to prepare for the ceremony, and as the date drew near, Rose and Andrew carefully planned every detail of the ruse. Andrew would pretend to die from food poisoning, and they would hold a mock funeral for him, one that would convince the Widows Club that he was truly gone. Once the plan was set in motion, Rose used her influence to hire a doctor who was willing to help. The doctor, a trusted ally from her past dealings, agreed to administer a powerful injection that would make Andrew appear lifeless. The injection would slow his breathing to a near imperceptible rate and cause his body temperature to drop. giving the illusion of death, but in reality, he would be in a deep sleep, alive but unresponsive. Rose had every detail planned, ensuring that the Widows' Club would believe their ruse. She was determined to protect Andrew at all costs, even if it meant walking a dangerous path. The stakes were higher than ever, but she refused to let them fall into the club's clutches. After the procedure, Rose carefully arranged for Andrew to be kept in a secret ward at a private hospital. It would be easy for anyone looking to find him to believe that he was in a mortuary. The hospital room was dimly lit, and his body was kept under cold sheets, his heart rate monitored by medical equipment that only showed faint, steady beeps. To the outside world, Andrew was dead. Only Rose and the few trusted individuals involved in the scheme knew the truth. Meanwhile, Rose reached out to Ruth, arranging for her to come and confirm the death. Ruth arrived, her eyes narrowing suspiciously as she stood over Andrew's lifeless form. She took a long, lingering look at him, and then, with a cold smile, nodded. "His burial will be in 3 days," she said, her voice emotionless. Rose nodded back, carefully hiding the tension in her own chest. As Ruth walked out, Rose let out a slow breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The plan was moving forward, but the risk was enormous. There was no room for error. If the Widows' Club ever found out the truth, they would stop at nothing to destroy them both. After Ruth left, Rose made sure that Andrew's condition remained undetected. The secret ward where he rested was well guarded, and the medical staff who were in on the plan kept a watchful eye on him, ensuring he was nourished through an intravenous drip and that his condition remained stable. He was given just enough sustenance to keep his body from deteriorating while he was asleep, his muscles and skin slowly recovering from the effects of the injection. The days leading up to the funeral were filled with a strange sense of unease. Every time Rose entered the room where Andrew lay, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the deception. The Widows' Club was no fool. They would be watching, and if they ever suspected anything out of the ordinary, the consequences would be dire. But for now, she played the role of the grieving widow, mourning the loss of the man she loved, knowing it was the only way to protect them both. On the day of the funeral, Rose put on a mask of sorrow, ready to face the women of the Widows' Club one last time. She wore a long black dress, her face partially hidden beneath a veil. Her eyes were red and swollen, not just from pretending to cry, but from the weight of the deception they had to carry out. Friends and family gathered quietly around the open grave, their faces heavy with mourning. Andrew's parents sat beneath a canopy, clutching each other for comfort. His mother sobbed softly into a handkerchief, while his father sat in stoic silence, his eyes glazed over in shock. A sleek black casket lay suspended above the grave, surrounded by an elaborate arrangement of white lilies and roses, Andrew's favorite flowers. A pastor stood at the head, reading solemn verses from the Bible, his voice trembling with emotion. Rose sat at the front, her heart thudding violently beneath her ribcage. She felt suffocated by the weight of the act they were performing, but she forced herself to keep her composure. This was the only way. The sound of hymns filled the air, and several guests stepped forward to share kind words about Andrew's life, how he had been a man of integrity, a devoted partner, and someone who brought light to every room he entered. But just as the ceremony seemed to be reaching its quiet conclusion, the atmosphere shifted. The sound of expensive heels clicking against the concrete path echoed through the cemetery. Heads turned as a fleet of black luxury cars pulled up to the entrance. Rose's heart sank. She recognized the familiar spectacle even before she saw them. The Widows' Club had arrived. Dressed in flowing black gowns and veils, the women emerged in perfect unison. Ruth led them, a twisted smirk hidden behind her veil as her sharp eyes scanned the gathering. Behind her the others followed, all draped in gold jewelry and accompanied by bodyguards who carried lavish flower arrangements and bundles of crisp bills. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder as the women paraded forward, creating an aura of unease and intrigue. The sight of them at a funeral was unusual, unsettling even, but no one dared question them. The Widows' Club held untouchable power, and their presence alone commanded attention. Rose's heart raced as Ruth approached, standing right beside her at the edge of the grave. "My dear Rose," Ruth whispered, leaning slightly towards her, "you've done well." Rose stiffened, her fingers clutching the handkerchief in her lap. "Thank you for coming," she replied, her voice barely steady. Ruth smiled, as if amused by Rose's nervousness. She turned to the casket, nodding in approval. He was handsome. Such a shame he had to go so soon, but sacrifices must be made for a brighter future. Wouldn't you agree? Rose forced herself to nod, unable to meet Ruth's eyes. Behind Ruth, the other widows began spraying bundles of money around the grave. The thick scent of cash filled the air as the bills fluttered down, a grotesque display of wealth in the midst of mourning. Andrew's mother gasped, watching as the women tossed the money without a care. She glanced at Rose in confusion, but said nothing, sensing that whatever was happening was far beyond her understanding. The pastor hesitated, glancing at Rose for guidance, unsure whether to continue. Rose gave him a subtle nod, signaling for him to proceed with the final prayers. As the casket was slowly lowered into the grave, Ruth leaned closer to Rose once more, her lips barely moving. "I'll visit you tonight," she whispered. "We need to talk. About your next steps." Rose's heart froze, but she forced a polite smile. "Of course. I'll be ready." Satisfied, Ruth and the other widows stepped back, disappearing as quietly as they had come, leaving behind a graveyard filled with hushed confusion and unease. When the last of the guests began to leave, Rose remained seated by the grave, watching as the workers began shoveling dirt over the casket. Beneath the earth, Andrew lay in a deep, forced sleep. She could only pray that everything would go as planned. As soon the crowd dispersed, a team she had hired to exhume him began digging. As soon as the last spade of dirt had been removed and the casket was carefully lifted from the earth, Andrew's body was gently placed on a stretcher covered in a white sheet. Rose's pulse quickened as she looked around nervously, her stomach churning. She had hoped for this moment, Andrew's return to the land of the living, but now the fear of what the Widows' Club might do if they discovered her deception gripped her heart. The men and women who had assisted in the exhumation moved quickly, their movements coordinated and silent. They carried Andrew to a hidden van parked nearby, out of sight from prying eyes. Inside the van, the medical team was already prepared with the necessary equipment, IVs, medication, and oxygen. Rose's hands trembled as she watched Andrew's still form, praying silently. Minutes felt like hours as the team worked quickly and efficiently. They injected Andrew with a potent solution to revive him, their expert hands keeping him alive until his body could adjust to the life-saving treatments. Rose stood by, her anxiety mounting as she watched his chest slowly rise and fall. Then, without warning, from the shadows of the cemetery, the Widows' Club appeared once again, their black attire and cold, calculated movements making it clear that their wrath was about to be unleashed. Ruth stood in front, her eyes blazing with fury. Behind her stood the other members of the club, their expressions dark and vengeful. They had returned, and this time Rose knew there would be no turning back. The High Priestess, a woman with a regal presence and sharp, calculating eyes, stepped forward, her voice cold and full of authority. "How dare you deceive a sacred order?" she demanded, her tone like ice. "You think you can play with us and get away with it? Do you understand the consequences of your betrayal?" Rose stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had crossed a line that even the Widows' Club could not forgive. But she had done what she thought was necessary to protect her future, her love for Andrew, and the life they had begun to build together. "Please," Rose whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. "I had no choice. I couldn't let you take him away from me. You don't understand what it's like to love someone so deeply and to know that they could be lost forever." The High Priestess sneered, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of Andrew's still lifeless form. "You think you can simply walk away from us, Rose?" she spat. "You are nothing without us. The Widows' Club made you, and we will destroy you." Before Rose could respond, one of the members stepped forward, her voice laced with venom. "You should have known better, Rose. You've been playing a dangerous game, and now it's time to pay the price. You thought you could outrun us, but you can never escape what we are." Rose's eyes flicked to Andrew, who was still unconscious, but his breathing had become steadier. She could see the faint rise and fall of his chest, a sign that the plan was working, that he was slowly returning to life. The priestess stepped closer, her gaze never leaving Rose. "You've broken the most sacred rule, Rose. The rule that says you can never marry for love, that you must never have a life outside of the Widow's Club, and now you will pay dearly for it. The High Priestess raised her staff high, her eyes glowing with fury as she prepared to unleash the full power of the Widow's Club upon Rose. The women around her began chanting in a low, ancient hum, their voices blending together in a powerful and unsettling symphony. The air seemed to crackle with dark energy, and Rose felt her heart race as a cold chill swept over her. She trembled, knowing that this was it, the moment when everything would either be destroyed or saved. Just as the priestess was about to strike, a sudden powerful force surged through the cemetery, and the priest who had officiated Andrew's mock funeral appeared from nowhere. Dressed in a simple robe, but with an undeniable aura of spiritual strength, he stood between Rose and the wrath of the Widow's Club. His presence was commanding, and the dark energy surrounding them began to waver in its intensity. "Enough!" the priest shouted, his voice strong and unwavering. "You will not harm her." Rose, terrified and unable to move, instinctively crouched behind the priest, hiding from the storm of power that surrounded them. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she dared not look up. She could feel the weight of the Widow's Club's fury, and she knew that only divine intervention could save them now. The High Priestess's eyes narrowed, her lip curling into a sneer. "You think you can stop us?" she spat. "We are the Widow's Club. We hold the power of generations. You are no match for us." But the priest did not flinch. He held his ground, his hands raised in prayer. "By the authority of the Almighty, I command you to leave this place. You will not harm anyone here." The women of the Widow's Club, unable to contain their anger, began chanting louder, their voices rising in a crescendo of dark energy. But the priest was undeterred. He reached into his robe and produced a small bottle of holy water. He held it up high, the silver top glinting in the moonlight. "With this holy water, I purify this ground," the priest intoned, his voice steady and calm. "By the power of God, I cast out all darkness. You shall not have dominion here." With a swift motion, the priest uncorked the bottle and began sprinkling the holy water onto the Widow's Club members. The effect was immediate and violent. As the drops of water touched their skin, the women recoiled, screeching in pain as though they had been burned. Their bodies jerked, as if being repelled by an invisible force. One by one, they fell to the ground, writhing in agony, their screams echoing through the night air. The High Priestess, who had been leading the charge, struggled to maintain her composure, but her strength faltered. She dropped her staff, clutching at her chest as though she was suffocating, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" she gasped, her voice hoarse with rage and fear. The priest's eyes were calm, his face serene. "The power of God is greater than all the darkness you wield," he replied simply. With each sprinkling of holy water, another of the Widow's Club members fell, unable to withstand the cleansing force. They screeched and howled, their bodies twitching as though something inside them was being driven out. Within moments, the entire group of women lay on the ground, their power stripped away, their energy exhausted. The High Priestess, who had been the last to fall, crumpled to the earth with a final guttural scream. The air, once thick with malevolent energy, now felt light and still. The storm that had raged between the Widow's Club and the priest had ended, and all that remained were the faint echoes of their cries. Rose, still hiding behind the priest, slowly lifted her head. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. The Widow's Club, the very women who had controlled her life, were now defeated, and the priest, a stranger to her until this moment, had been her protector. Andrew's still form lay nearby, but Rose had no time to check on him just yet. Her heart still pounded in her chest from the fear and the overwhelming emotions of what had just happened. "Is it over?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The priest turned to her, his expression softening as he nodded. "Yes, the darkness has been driven out." "How did you know?" Rose asked. "I sensed their dark energy when they walked into the burial ceremony, and the Spirit of God told me to come back here. I didn't know what was going to happen, but on getting here, I saw and heard everything, and I immediately knew God sent me back just to save you." "But they'll come back, won't they?" Rose's voice was filled with uncertainty. She had no idea what the Widow's Club was capable of, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly the end. The priest placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a sense of comfort and reassurance. The Widows' Club thrives on fear, Rose. They have power, yes, but it is a power that can be overcome. You've broken free of their control. You just need to believe that. But to have complete freedom, you will have to give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. You will return everything the Widows' Club gave you to charity, and only then will you be completely free. Rose's heart swelled with gratitude. She had been living in constant fear, trapped by the weight of their influence, but now she had a chance at freedom. "I will," she said. "As long as I don't lose him, I will give it all away for this man right here," she said. Turning back to Andrew, she quickly moved to his side, checking his pulse. It was steady, strong, and he was slowly coming back to consciousness. He blinked up at her, his eyes a bit hazy. "Rose?" he whispered, his voice hoarse but filled with warmth. "What happened? Did we make it?" Rose smiled through her tears, her relief overwhelming her. "We made it, Andrew. We're free." Andrew slowly sat up, his body still weak from the ordeal, but he was alive. And together they had triumphed over the Widows' Club's dark power. As they embraced, the priest stepped back, giving them the space they needed to heal. "You've been given a new chance, Rose," he said softly. "Make the most of it." Rose nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and newfound determination. She had come so far, fought so hard, and now, with Andrew by her side, they could face whatever came next, together. The battle against the Widows' Club was over, but their new life was just beginning. And as the first rays of dawn began to light the sky, Rose knew that no matter what happened, she would never again be afraid to live for herself, for love, and for the future they would build together.